Hello and welcome to your Mental Wellness Part 2 presented by Ariza Credit Union. My name is Akira Patterson and I will be your host for this evening's discussion. Remember that in recognizing the need for holistic wellness in one's overall well-being and financial wellness, Ariza Credit Union had the vision, saw the need to have these series of conversations. We want to thank you so much for your feedback for the first part of our discussion that happened a few weeks ago because of the immense feedback, as I said, and because of your continued support and continued calling for conversations around mental health, mental wellness, holistic wellness. We are back and happy to be having another discussion around issues surrounding holistic wellness. This will be the second discussion that, as I said, that we will have in a series of 5 discussions. Still to come, you will witness your physical wellness, and that will be presented by Dr. Brooks Smith-Lowe and Mrs. Stephanie Simpson-Lewis. And then your financial wellness, which will be the last installment in the series, presented by Miss Kimberlyn Regis and Mrs. Luann Phillips Henry. Today, I am happy to say that I am joined by the very brilliant, also comfortable to speak to, someone that's no stranger to this series, Josh Hector. For those of you that were present for our first installment, you will remember that Josh is a counseling psychologist and co-founder of Optimal Solutions, which is a private practice based here in Grenada. He also offers counseling psychotherapy and workshops. He has a Master's of Science in Counseling Psychotherapy from the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, and he has worked in the prison and education systems in Jamaica, Barbados, as well as here in Grenada. Presently, he is a part-time lecturer at the St. George's University, and he is an executive member of the Grenada Psychological Association, as well as CANPA, the Caribbean Alliance of National Psychological Associations. Please remember that at any point you can weigh in on the discussions that we are having today because we are live on Ariza Credit Union's Facebook page as well as GBN Television. So to all of our viewers, whether you're viewing via social media facilitated by Ariza or you're viewing on national television, we say welcome to you and feel free to join in the discussions. The number to dial 414-2285. So again, you can WhatsApp us, add it to your phone, add it to your WhatsApp, and you can send anonymous messages, anonymous questions that Josh will be able to take in our discussion. Welcome back.
Thank you,
Josh.
It's my pleasure to be back here again.
How have you been?
I've been good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
what interesting have been happening in your life so far? In the life of a counseling psychologist.
Well, how do I go about answering that? I mean, it's dynamic. A lot happens.
Mm-hmm. I know that you are doing a few studies.
Well, I'm actually doing my doctorate in clinical psychology.
Splendid.
Yeah.
And I heard that you had a few courses in that and you're good now. So you're free to have these conversations.
Well, I don't know about free. I'm just about 5 courses in.
Okay.
I have a few left. Mm-hmm. I have quite a few left actually.
Okay.
And comprehensive exam, tra-la-la-la-la.
Yeah. We're looking forward to you having your doctorate.
I am as well.
Truly, because we need minds like you in Grenada. Yeah. So let's dive right into the conversation. Last time we were discussing, we spoke about depression, we spoke about various types, but we had to come back and have this follow-up conversation because we needed to delve a little deeper, Josh, into much more issues, especially weighing in on the feedback that we got from people. They definitely wanted to have another installment and have a further discussion surrounding depression, etc. So let's start by recapping or redefining depression.
Okay, so when we talk about depression, and the last time we spoke, I actually had to clarify the whole depression issue because people can be depressed normally, right? You can have a depressed mood. from time to time we have depressed moods because of events, circumstances, and so on. But when we talk about depression as in clinical depression, we venture into an area where we have symptoms which ought to be satisfied in order for a diagnosis.
Yes.
And interestingly, well, we'll be talking about this today. There are different types of depressive disorders.
Yes. Yes.
So sometimes a person might be experiencing complications, so to speak, and they do not actually recognize that this particular thing is also depression. There's an interesting one that we'll talk about today.
Splendid.
And depression is definitely something that needs attention. We should not slight it. What we tend to do, typically here in Grenada and in some other places as well, is sweep mental issues under the rug.
Yeah.
And it is important to break through the stigma. And so we can now feel free about discussing mental issues because they are on par with physical issues.
Right.
The same way you take care of your physical health, you take care of your mental health as well. And hopefully through this discussion and more, we can normalize mental health and mental issues.
And discussions around it. I remember the last time we were saying the word mental has a negative connotation.
Exactly, because mental means crazy to some people, which is incorrect.
Exactly, in and of itself. So we did speak about, the different ways of identifying depressive moods and depression previously, but now, as you mentioned, we really want to delve deeper into types of depression. So let's have a discussion around that. What are the types of depression?
Okay, so let me say, rather, what are the types of depressive disorders?
Right.
You have major depressive disorder, which we discussed the last time, and we will touch on it a little bit today. You have persistent depressive disorder. You also have premenstrual dysphoric disorder. That is related to the ladies.
Oh, so why is it that females have to have a specific type of depressive disorders?
I suppose they have a specific type of body.
True. Is there a specific type for males?
No.
No. See?
That you get, unfortunately, you get to have that.
All right. Another benefit of being a female.
We also have substance-induced depression.
Right. Right.
Right, which can happen as a result of being exposed to a substance, substance and medicine induced.
Right.
Whether it is a substance that you are intoxicated by or actually a medication that you take.
And the depression is a side effect of it.
Depression could actually be a side effect of different medications.
So let's take each of these one by one, Josh, and really discuss it, because I know that people would be experiencing, and sometimes, as you said, we're not necessarily able to identify when we have a depressive disorder or when we're exhibiting, signs of depression. So let's look at these, and then
there's actually one I missed, and I think it would be good to start there. And that is the disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. This one is actually diagnosed between the ages of 6 and 10.
Interesting.
You can't diagnose this later than the age of 18. It's sort of like a pediatric type of depression.
Depression. Oh, so you can identify depression in kids.
Yes, and the myth is that children can't be depressed.
Because you would think that children are happy all the time, and if you see a child sad, you just figure, okay, or exhibiting different signs, you would think, well, okay, maybe that child didn't get what they want, so they're throwing a tantrum or stuff like that. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So if we backtrack to stress, as we spoke about it during our last discussion, and how stress can actually lead up to depression. And we also mentioned the fact that there may be some biological issues as well that can cause depression. Guess what? The issues that cause depression in adults can also cause depression in children.
Wow. No, that's very interesting, Josh. I think we definitely need to settle in on this.
Yeah, the notion that children can't be depressed is actually quite false.
So how do you identify depressive disorders
Okay, so
in
the
children?
specific type that I mentioned, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, this one, and this is a key point, depression in children would often be identified by irritability.
Right.
Right? What might sometimes come across as defiance could actually be a form of childhood depression.
But this presents a tricky situation, Josh, because how do you distinguish when, let's say, for example, you believe as a parent that a child is throwing a tantrum, or a child is just irritable because the child is being fussy,
Okay.
from this type of
So
situation?
let's talk about this. Let's unpackage it. So there are a few symptoms that would have to be satisfied, like in any case of depression. You have to satisfy some symptoms. So let's start with angry outbursts,
Right.
whether verbally or behaviorally, that do not actually reflect the event or the circumstance. The outbursts that go beyond an event or circumstance, where it seems as if this child went from 0 to 1,000
Yeah.
because the toy fell.
Right. So there must be something more to it. It cannot just be because the toy fell.
Not only does the intensity outmatch the situation, the duration as well.
Right. So it's a persistent,
The-
reoccurring.
The mood actually, that disruptive mood stays for an extended period. So they might very well be upset about the toy hours later. These angry outbursts actually have to occur at least 3 times per week.
Okay. So that's the first identifier.
Well, the first identifier was mentioned just a while ago, where the outbursts actually, they seem to be disproportionate.
Right.
Right. Secondly, the outbursts also disproportionate in intensity and duration. Secondly, they last for an extended period of time.
Right.
They just stick around. Not only this, the irritability and the anger that can be observed is actually persistent. So that even in between events, you still note a general pattern of irritability in this child.
Right. So it cannot be misconstrued for a normal situation. It will definitely be something that you could identify at a period of time. So in terms of that specifically, how would a parent go about dealing with that situation? Now, given the fact that they would have recognized this, what's the next step?
Right. So the next step, of course, is, well, if you have a parent who's who's knowledgeable about these things,
Right.
knowledgeable about tips and strategies and so on, then that's a good place to start. But if not, it's always important to seek some sort of professional help to intervene, because this can actually graduate.
Yeah.
With age, it can become, other issues can come about as a result.
Yeah.
Right? So it's important to deal with it early. In the case of a child who has this specific disorder, what is necessary would be sometimes medication, actually. Sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. And the parent is also the client.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, once you have a child who is underage, the parent is also the client.
Of course, because that parent is also it's the responsibility of the parent,
Yes.
the child.
And when they leave therapy, the parent has to pick up until they return.
Exactly.
Because ultimately, the goal of therapy, contrary to what some people might believe, it's not to keep you in therapy. The goal is that so that you eventually handle things on your own. You're
Yes.
empowered to do so. Similarly, in this case, you want to empower the parent to deal with this child while simultaneously helping the child overcome the moods that they might have.
So what recommendation would you have for parents who are hesitant to, act on this, or probably think that it's a passing phase, or,
Right.
something they can just endure and the child will grow out of it? Because you hear these things a lot. He's going to grow out of it,
Yeah.
or she will grow out of it. It's just a phase. What would be the message there for those parents?
So, in all honesty, there are some things that children grow out of. The curiosity, for example, in some instances, that might be a good example of something that children grow out of. But generally, behavioral things, we cannot treat them like rolling a dice and leave it up to chance to say that they're young, they will grow it out.
Yes.
Chances are, if you don't address certain things, they become cemented in a child's character and they don't grow out of it. It only gets worse.
So it can morph into other things later on in life as the child grows up, and can it be exacerbated to even different type or an adult type of depressive disorder?
Well,
Does
here's
it
the thing about
move
this,
on?
right? Because there's an element of this that is that contains aggression,
Right.
verbally and physically. So a child who possesses disorder is going to be okay with hitting somebody, and they actually might not be as responsive to punishment as a typical child would.
Right.
We hear this all the time. For example, parents say it doesn't matter what they do, they take away things.
It doesn't matter.
It really doesn't matter. Nothing
The child
seems
continues.
to be working. The child
Yeah.
just continues.
So in that case, this could literally be something more that needs to be identified and treated.
So here's the thing. I will not go as far as saying identified and treated. I would say identified.
Identified.
Because truth be told, sometimes there are presenting problems and issues. A diagnosis is not always necessary.
Okay.
What might be necessary in a lot of cases is just changing some things in the environment or changing the way you discipline or interact with
Well,
the
then
child.
that's good, because it takes the pressure away, because now it's not like, okay, something is wrong and you have to, because when you hear treatment, sometimes you think there's a negative connotation to it. So if it's something that's environmental that's causing that situation, then some of the tension should be relieved from the parent to feel comfortable.
This is a
Wouldn't
good,
you-
this is
wouldn't
a
you
good,
say?
This is a good time to just interject and say this. I see clients and I hardly diagnose. Diagnosis really depends on what the client brings to the table. But actually, a lot of the time, people just have some circumstantial issues that are troublesome. Perhaps their coping strategy is wrong.
Right.
If in my professional judgment I realize, wait a minute, this seems to be this is pointing toward a diagnosis, then I consult my manual.
Right.
But a diagnosis is not always required. Let me just throw that out there.
The pressure is off there.
Yeah, it's not a diagnosis is not
The
always
pressure is
required.
off. And sometimes I think that's probably the biggest deterrent,
Right.
because you would think, okay, once, you have a mental disorder or you have a depressive conditions and stuff like that, you would automatically think, well, oh, there needs to be treatment, because of the myths surrounded around treating or even recognizing, as you said, just identifying, one of these issues. So I think that's great. And specifically for parents, if you have questions surrounding that, because you have, a child or your child is exhibiting certain characteristics and you want to ask Josh a question, you can feel free to do so by WhatsApping us. Again, it's completely anonymous, so the message will come in. I will ask Josh, and just like that, you can get the answer and see whether or not this is something that requires further attention. That's why we're having this discussion, to really and truly help everyone that's viewing. Okay, Josh, so let's move on to another type of one of those depressive disorders.
Okay, so MDD, major depressive disorder, that is the classic disorder within this category.
Right.
And for MDD, you actually have to have 5 symptoms that persist. Basically, the symptoms persist at the same time. 5
Simultaneously.
simultaneously for a 2-week period.
Okay, that's very specific.
Yeah, it has to be 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And the symptoms must involve a depressed mood, and also they must involve a diminished interest in normal activities.
What would you classify as a depressed mood? How do we identify that?
Okay, so sadness,
Okay.
for example, yeah, average sadness, good old sadness. You lose money and you feel sad about it. That is a depressed mood,
Yeah.
and that is specific to a situation. You have depression when you satisfy the symptoms. So when people, the average person says, "Oh, I'm depressed," a lot of the times they're not.
Right. They're just having a sad mood that's based on an
They're
instant.
just having a depressed mood that is specific to a circumstance.
Yeah.
So the 5 or more symptoms that we talk about with the major depressive disorder would include things like, as I said, the depressed mood, lack of interest. You also have low energy. You have significant weight loss or weight gain, either related to overeating or not eating well.
Right.
So you either gain a lot of weight or lose a lot of weight in a short space of time. You also have feelings of hopelessness and inappropriate guilt, blaming oneself for things, difficulty concentrating or thinking clearly. You even have thoughts of suicide
Right.
without a specific plan to actually follow through on. But you have some thoughts of suicide as well. So you have to actually have
All 5 of these.
Well, that's more than 5.
Yeah.
But you need to have
5
5
of them.
or more. You could have more, but at least 5 basically consistently, persistently for 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how you identify it. And know when that has happened, what is the next step?
So depression is, again, and this would apply to all the different types of disorders under this category. Depression can be resolved by psychotherapy and or medication.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because a lot of the times, as I said, it's the apprehension about the treatment that is the biggest deterrent in having conversations about it, in admitting, that you are exhibiting these symptoms. So let's talk a little bit about psychotherapy. Let's talk a little bit about all of that.
So, in other words, you want me to tell you what psychotherapy is?
Yes.
So let me make a distinction here between counseling and psychotherapy. Friends, family members counsel each other all the time, for example. They give counsel. Oh, you have that issue, let's see what's going on here. This is the problem. What are the alternatives? Which is the best one? There you go. That's counsel.
Yeah.
So you can have informal counseling as well as you can have professional counseling.
Right.
Right. But I'm certain that your family member is not going to offer psychotherapy.
No, definitely not.
Very different. Psychotherapy really involves helping people navigate through difficult emotional issues. It also involves dealing with things like past issues, unresolved issues.
Right.
It's issues both past and present, right? Unresolved things that have an emotional impact on a person.
Right.
That's where psychotherapy comes in, to help deal with the distress that a person might be experiencing. And so one of the things that I use, one of the theories that I use in psychotherapy is called cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right.
And that simply involves helping people to recognize how their thoughts affect their behavior, how their thoughts affect their emotions and ultimately their behavior.
Yeah.
Guess what? CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is quite useful for depression. Simply because when people are experiencing depression, MDD as I just described, there are a lot of faulty beliefs that they hold on to. And they literally start accepting things that are not even real. For example, you do not suddenly lose your ability to do what you've been doing for a long time. It's there. You still know how to do that, but suddenly you don't feel like you can. You start to believe like you can't, and you're stuck.
Yeah.
Why do you feel like you can't? You feel like you can't because you think that you can't.
So the thought,
It starts with
it
the
starts
thought.
with the thought. And that takes me back to the previous conversation that we were having, because you have to have the thought first.
Of course. Thoughts become things.
Yes. And so that means that most of the time, or at least, in situations specific to what we are discussing, people will have thoughts, but sometimes it's not necessarily what is actually happening. It's just, that concept in your head that's causing you to react a certain way, or causing you to not be able to behave a certain way.
Something just came to mind. Imagine that you put a movie on and you project it.
Yes.
Sometimes we literally, the movie that I'm talking about here are the things that we're thinking. And we project faulty thoughts into our reality. We can actually see the things that we're thinking as if they're real when they're not. And a lot of persons who are depressed have issues with their cognition. They struggle with faulty thoughts and beliefs.
And you see, so in having this conversation, it's important to recognize how crucial psychotherapy is. Because it may sound like a word that's pretty serious, because you hear psychotherapy and you just think, just as the average person, Josh, and probably not necessarily knowing too much about,
Right.
the whole realm of mental health and mental wellness, and you think, oh,
Psychotherapy. Okay, doctor visit. How does that sound?
not too bad,
Psychotherapy is
not
literally...
too bad.
They're one and the same.
Yeah, because you think, oh, my hand's hurting, let me go check it out.
Here's what
So
happens.
why can't it be that easy?
Here's what happens. There's something that persons tend to have, and those are symptoms. They're called somatic symptoms. Basically, a somatic symptom occurs when you experience a physical symptom that has no physical origin.
So then the origin is
The origin is actually mental.
mental. Yeah.
And you go to the doctor and the doctor says, I can't tell you what's wrong. Or the doctor, most doctors know about this, so they say, I think you need to watch your stress
Yeah.
because you're having somatic symptoms that appear as physical symptoms, but the origin is not physical at all.
It's not physical at all. And that's why it's so important to be as mindful about your mental health as you would be about your physical health. Because literally, sometimes it's not related to your physical being.
So what is health? Health is holistic. Health involves the physical and the mental.
And the mental.
So minus mental health, there is no health. And that's a famous quote. There's no health without
mental health. And that's why I love this conversation so much, literally. Let's delve in a little bit to speak about depression specific to females, specifically to women. You mentioned that a little bit earlier, and I'd like for us to delve into that.
Right. So specifically to females, you have what is called a premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Which involves, actually it falls under depression, which
Yes.
means that there is some depression in the midst. So some of the symptoms of the other disorders that we mentioned under depression, they're shared. But there are some other things that are specific to females
Right.
that we'll talk about.
That, definitely. So we are about to take a very short break right now to facilitate the lotto draw that is going to happen live on GBN. So we will be back in just a short few to continue our conversation with Josh Hector, counseling psychologist, and delve deeper into issues surrounding depressive disorders. See you in a little bit.
Ariza says, thank you. When I need shelter, warmth, security, I know you'd be there. Something in these moments lets me know you care. Maybe the way you shield me, maybe it's your smiles and the way you tell me it's okay to try. Now I'm invincible, I can pack my sack, I can take the long road, 'cause it's okay to look back if I am scared. I know you're there. Arise, together there's no limit to what we can do. Arise, with no wings, fly. Arise, and we're so high, enjoy the view. Arise, look, no wings, fly.
This is Ariza, your financial freedom, your future. Ariza says, thank you.
When I need shelter, warmth, security, I know you'd be there. Something in these moments lets me know you care. Maybe the way you shield me, maybe it's your smiles and the way you tell me it's okay to try. Now I'm invincible, I can pack my sack, I can take the long road, 'cause it's okay to look back if I am scared. I know you're there. Arise, together there's no limit to what we can do. Arise, with no wings, fly. Arise, and we're so high, enjoy the view. Arise, look, no wings, fly.
This is Ariza, your financial freedom, your future. Ariza says, thank you.
When I need shelter, warmth, security, I know you'd be there. Something in these moments lets me know you care. Maybe the way you shield me, maybe it's your smiles and the way you tell me it's okay to try. Now I'm invincible, I can pack my sack, I can take the long road, 'cause it's okay to look back if I am scared. I know you're there.
This is Ariza, your financial freedom, your future. And how
Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, my name is Akira Patterson. I'm here having a discussion with Josh Hector, facilitated and presented by Ariza Credit Union. We are discussing your mental wellness. This is the second part installation in a series of discussions that we will be having to discuss holistic wellness. We had a first conversation around your mental wellness a few weeks ago, and this is the follow-up edition of that conversation. Before we went on the break, Josh and I were discussing depressive disorders specific to females. He hinted a little bit about it, and we are going to delve a little bit deeper right now. So again, feel free if at any point you would like to send a question and weigh in on the discussion, because this conversation is to facilitate as much of your questions and interests as possible, especially with conversations around mental wellness. So you can feel free to WhatsApp us. Again, it's completely anonymous, so you send your questions, we address it, and hopefully assist you. Josh, let's
Yes.
pick up where we left off.
So we were talking about premenstrual dysphoric disorder.
Yes.
And for this to be present, for this to be diagnosed, so to speak, you have to have, quite like the major depressive disorder, you need to have at least 5 symptoms.
Right.
But when this begins, it's critical. It has to begin at least a week before menstruation, and then a few days after menstruation, the symptoms are supposed to start declining.
Yes.
And then when menstruation has finished, then the symptoms decline. Sometimes they disappear altogether.
So the question now is, Josh, how do we distinguish? Because a lot of the times, generally, a female will, have all sort of different forms of PMS. And then you just think, okay, this is just some sort of PMS. And you just sweep it under the rug, throw it over the shoulder. How do we know? How do we distinguish that this is something
So
different?
let's identify some of those symptoms
Yes.
and see where that takes us. So, of course, you have the mood changes,
Right.
the drastic mood changes. But with the mood changes, yes, there's irritability, but there are other things like hypersensitivity to rejection, for example.
Okay.
Right? Even if under normal circumstances, this woman, this young lady might be confident and is certain, and nobody actually causes them to feel bad about themselves, they can't deal with rejection at this point.
Right.
It becomes difficult for them to deal with rejection. Marked irritability and anger, and you also have anxiety, tension, feeling like you're on the edge.
Right.
Right. But in addition to this, you also have depressive symptoms, such as the diminished mood. You also have a lack of energy, lack of interest in regular activities.
Right.
The change in the appetite is a bit different, though, because the change in the appetite involves increase in appetite or specific cravings. Specific cravings.
Yeah.
And there's another thing that can actually happen, which in isolation does not reflect this particular disorder.
Right.
And that is the bloating
Yes.
and the sensitivity. These things can actually happen in isolation, and they do not mean that the woman has premenstrual dysphoric disorder. However, if they happen in conjunction with all the other symptoms,
Yeah.
that is where we
Okay.
can say that indeed that is what this is.
So, seeing as this is a cyclical occurrence,
Yes.
how is it that we would go about addressing?
But let me say this: it is important to understand one thing. It has to be if you look back a year, it should be a case where all cycles, or most of the cycles in the past year at least, would have had these specific concerns.
Okay.
So it's not just a random one-off thing, because for different reasons there are challenges during that time. But this has to be consistent.
Right.
How do you go about dealing with this? Now, there are a number of things that a not physical, but a medical doctor, would be able to prescribe. I tend to avoid speaking on these things because I'm not a medical doctor. I can't give that kind of advice.
Right.
But there are things such as your diet. Your diet is
Interesting.
critical. What you eat. What
What would you
drink.
recommend in terms of that?
Well, what you should
You'd have
not.
to, yeah, or what you shouldn't. Yes.
Caffeine.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Excessive
Well, womp
alcohol,
to the coffee drinkers.
excessive alcohol. Smoking.
Okay.
Right. There are things that we ingest, things that we do that we seem to have no issue with. But guess what? When your menstrual cycle comes around, you could actually pay for it.
Right.
Exercise is important to guard against this as well. And another critical element is, under normal circumstances, trying to avoid getting wound up. Trying to avoid excessive arguments.
Yes. Well, we will have to have a whole session to discuss that, Josh, literally, in terms of, sometimes just controlling, being triggered, being drawn in, or recognizing triggers to become upset. Sometimes, it takes a little bit to cultivate that sort of control. So, I feel like that will have to be something that will be continuous, and every day you talk to yourself a little bit more, and hopefully you try to, chip away at it. Yeah.
Of course, and it boils down to the mind and practicing your mind.
Yes.
In a particular way. Because we are creatures of habit, our thought patterns are also habits. The way we think is a habit.
And that quote comes back to me that you cannot control what other people do or what happens outside of you. The only person you're in control of is yourself. So you can literally control whether you will relinquish your power and have someone trigger you, or have an instance trigger you, or, we spoke a little bit about road rage in the previous one, and, all of these things, all of these triggers. So probably just thinking about all of these females, maybe sitting, listening to this conversation and thinking,
See, the thing about triggers in this context, because this is all related, triggers can literally be learned.
Right.
A young lady can learn a trigger from her mom or from other women, from TV. Triggers can be
From
learned.
Instagram.
From Instagram. For example, Instagram can say to you, when this happens, this is how you behave. And that can lead us, and both males and females, that could lead us down a rabbit hole. We're not going to find our way.
So the key is awareness.
Yes.
The key is awareness.
Yes.
That's what I'm getting from it, definitely. Yes. Let's take a couple questions now. Someone asked, thank you very much for your question. What is the etiology of DMDD?
Okay. So,
And then, can someone have MDD with atypical features?
okay. So let me go back to the first question. If you look at which one was that?
DMDD.
DMDD. At this point, there is no known cause.
Right.
Right? You cannot specifically pinpoint a cause. What we have up to this point are potential contributing factors.
Right.
So, for example, one of those would be hostility at home, hostility in the family, hostility with parents, siblings, etc. That can actually have that impact on a child.
Right.
Also, if it could be a temperament issue, and by temperament I mean the child's natural disposition. So there are 3 identified temperaments. You have, and when I say difficult, do not attach a negative connotation. But
Right.
you have easygoing, and that is actually imprinted at birth. Those who are easygoing,
Yes.
when you tell them to stop,
They
say,
stop.
okay.
That's the people who are blessed with, blessed with specific types of children.
Let me. I wouldn't say that.
No, because you always hear people say, "Oh my God, my child doesn't, is a piece of cake to deal with." Such a,
Well, you know what? I won't say some people are blessed because I don't want to end up saying that some
right,
people are
the
blessed.
opposite, right? Of course,
Okay,
of course.
So there's that. Then you have children who are called slow to warm up. So
Yeah.
they come into the room, they seem like they're not going to say a word, and then once they get comfortable,
Yeah,
you wonder if it's the same child. And then you have the difficult ones
right.
who naturally want things to go their way.
Right.
So stop is a problem. No is also a problem.
Yes.
They're mostly fussy and etc. It is said that that temperament may be associated to the development of
The DMDD.
DMDD.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's said that that temperament may be associated with that simply because irritability is a feature.
Oh, right.
And the inability to deal with the irritability associates that as well. So that is why it is suggested that it may be an associated factor
Right.
when we look at the development of that specific disorder.
Okay.
But there is at this point no specific
Specific
cause.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So then we move to the next question, which is, can someone have MDD with atypical features?
It is atypical features. Actually, MDD is going to show itself.
Right.
Because when you look at these disorders, there is self-report is considered in line with observation. So it has to be reported and also observed.
Observed, yes.
And then we identify this is MDD. What can happen though is that you might have what's called a comorbidity, meaning that it's actually possible to have two disorders at the same time. And so it's possible. So if, for example, you narrow in or zero in on MDD,
Yes.
it could get a little confusing because something might show up that does not resemble MDD to a T.
Right, right. Well, that would be a bit tricky. So I guess that's especially where the observation comes in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because when we look at the report, a lot of the times people report things from a position of they lack insight. Basically, they don't understand what's happening. So their report has to be considered in line with the observation,
Right.
and that's where we draw the conclusion.
Okay. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you for answering. I'm sure that would have enlightened you based on the question. If you have a follow-up, feel free to let us know. Again, WhatsApping us, very anonymous. We want to ensure that we have, your confidentiality in addressing sometimes sensitive questions. Josh, you spoke a little bit about depressive disorders specific to substances, specific to medication that you may take. And I know that this may be, an issue for some people specifically. So let's talk about that.
So actually, substances can induce depression. As a matter of fact, substances can induce a number of mental disorders. For example, if you consider a disorder such as schizophrenia, schizophrenia is particularly if you have a parent who is mentally ill,
Right.
right? A child is actually going to be predisposed that child should not be consuming alcohol, for
Right.
example.
So let's
At
before we get into it, let's just define a little bit about schizophrenia, because you mentioned it as a term, just so that people will know exactly.
Well,
what
schizophrenia
it
is another mental disorder, and there are, quite like depression, there are
Yeah.
different categories where persons have symptoms such as hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, and it's basically also including disorganized thought
Yeah.
and speech as well. It's basically a group of disorders.
Right.
Quite like
'Cause
depression.
when you say that, it's very interesting, because most of the times that I hear schizophrenia, because I have never, been in contact with someone who exhibited symptoms or been diagnosed or anything like that, but I would most likely hear of it in movies, different shows, and
Yeah.
then what is the overarching symptom or focal point would be multiple personalities. So that's what immediately goes to my head when I think of schizophrenia.
So what happens in the person who is schizophrenic could actually be hearing different voices,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Different voices talking to them at once. There's a level of
And there's no one around.
no, there's no one around. It's traumatic to say
Yeah.
the least. But if I backpedal a little bit to the substances, if you are predisposed to some sort of mental illness, the same way you can be predisposed to a physical condition, right? Because, for example,
Right.
some of us know this, there's diabetes in the family.
Exactly,
So that means
hypertension.
we should not be using a lot
Yeah.
of salt or sugar,
You avoid all of that. Yes.
right?
Yes. And so likewise. With
But here's
mental
the
disorders.
issue, because we do not investigate mental issues like we should, most people don't know whether or not
They have some
they
sort.
are predisposed.
Yes. Yes.
Which means that either you find out or you be careful.
And you see, that's why I think these conversations are so important, because a lot of the times, if I don't know that there's a history of mental disorder in my family because there haven't been discussions, or they have not been properly identified, etc., then I won't be able to guard myself, against it.
Your default position should be practicing or living in such a way that you practice habits that would actually contribute to your mental health.
Yeah. Give me some quick ones.
Well, like we did some of this
Before,
last time.
but just to reiterate, and
Just to
especially for the new
correct.
viewers.
You want to focus on that thought element. What you're thinking, what you're saying to yourself about yourself, what you're thinking about life in general.
Right.
You need to ensure that you're thinking positively more often than not.
So don't be too hard on
Don't
yourself.
be too hard on yourself. Then exercise.
Okay.
Exercise is important.
For me, anytime I exercise, I have clarity of thought. Yeah.
That's what exercise does.
Yeah, that's the main thing.
Exercise and stress are enemies. Exercise always wins. Then you also want to be able to ensure you're eating right,
Right. And avoiding certain
avoiding certain things,
within your diet.
avoiding harmful substances,
Exactly.
substances that you actually don't need. For example,
Yeah.
right? We need food. We need water. We don't even need juice.
Yes. Yes, that
don't
was the
even need
conversation. You
juice.
you don't actually need juice.
Why
you
do-
need fruit?
We could, yes,
Yes.
food.
Yeah.
We
fruit.
throw up when we drink in excess because our bodies don't want this.
Right.
It's unnatural. That's your body's way of dispelling.
It is a sign. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
not like, and sometimes people say, you know what, I drank so much or whatever, but it's literally your body rejecting
Your body's rejecting
the
it.
substance.
Right? And so some of these substances can actually bring about mental issues. Depression can happen, for example, as a result of alcohol. And you also have issues related specifically to medicine, where there are medications that as a side effect, actually can cause depression. Some
Is
actually
there a
state,
particular reason though why for some medication, people it would say it may cause, but for others it may not? Does that lead back to the predisposition, or is it some variances in people?
it's definitely variances in people, simply because medications, we could take the same medication, but how it interacts with my body,
Right.
it's not going to be the same with you.
Yes.
And so I may end up depressed, you may not. But the thing about this particular type of depression, unlike the others, where we stated that the symptoms cannot be linked to exposure to any substance or medicine.
Right.
In this case, the symptoms cannot be linked to
Anything
any mental
other. Right. Okay.
disorder. It has to be based on a clinical report that this person took this medication, this is the result. Or because of this, the intoxication via this substance, here this person is now depressed.
Okay. So in that instance, it will be as simple as will it be as simple as taking that substance away, or taking that medication, getting off of that medication and getting onto another one to treat whatever it is that you had initially?
So again, if we're talking medication, which I don't have authority to speak on, a psychiatrist, for example,
Yeah.
a medical doctor would be able to identify what, at least medically, what should happen in a case like this.
Right.
But beyond that, we revert also back to the good old psychotherapy. That is
Definitely.
that is where persons like me would intervene
Yeah.
to assist any form of depression, for that matter.
Okay. Did we miss any of the depressive disorders?
No.
Right.
We did not.
I think we covered all of them, and as you can see, depression and depressive disorders is not manifested in one specific way. No. It's not linked to one specific attribute or situation. So again, it's about having conversations so that it's okay. We all know it's okay. We were speaking about mental health weeks ago, and we said that it was on a continuum.
Yes.
And a lot of the different things that we've discussed here today, shows that no one is immune, or it's not a special type of person or anything like that around that instance, because it could generally just be reactions
Yes.
to certain substances. It could be environmental, situational instances, and it's just a situation of identifying and then seeking the necessary intervention.
And I encourage people, well, there are two things. You don't want to rush your recovery.
Yeah,
You also don't want to prolong your pain,
exactly.
because you can't fake recovery. No. For example, some people do this. I know of a few instances where people cut off the cast prematurely.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. Sometimes it gets itchy.
It gets itchy.
You try to stick stuff in there.
I'm tired of this, so you know what? Let me just get rid of it.
Yeah,
Right, which can cause complications.
exactly. We know that.
Similarly, you're not going to pretend to be okay if you're not. Like, be true to where you are in the process.
And the actual duration of how long it takes to get better.
Well, it
for
depends.
yourself.
It depends. There is actually no universal duration.
It's specific
specific
to the person. Yeah, and so it will vary. And again, I mean, literally, that's why conversations are very important, because again, every person is an individual.
Because I have seen people who overcome depression, not like this, but rather quickly, and others take a longer time. So
Definitely. We touched a little bit last time on suicide, speaking about suicide, and suicide is essentially the end point. you know, as you mentioned before, because once it has happened, it has happened.
It's terminal.
It's terminal. But there are steps before that. Suicidal ideation and all of that. And I know that especially now with how people's lifestyles have been interrupted, changed, you know, economic, you know, hardships, financial hardships, all of that, people are being, shook. Literally
Shook, yeah.
shook literally.
Yeah.
And because of this, it's a matter of how do we prevent, how do we identify, how do we assist, people, our loved ones, and all of that. This has been a reoccurring topic in the feedback as well.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because I do want us to, just demystify it a bit. But even before that, speak to suicidal ideation. Yeah.
So suicidal ideation is in and of itself a range of, you have thoughts, you have planning.
Right.
It begins with a thought. Now, every person who has a suicidal thought does not have the plan to commit suicide. And we were talking earlier and saying that more people than we imagine at some point consider or just randomly think about suicide.
Yeah. Or just think about death,
Just think about death.
In and of itself.
Or even suicide. Why? Based on what might be happening at the moment.
Yes.
How do I get away from all this? How do I disappear? That does not necessarily escalate to planning. But planning is escalation.
Right.
And what follows planning would be behaviors.
Yes. Because after you plan, you act.
You act. And the thing about the behaviors is that they seldom go from 0 to 100 in an instant.
Right.
People experiment with different things at first. So, for example, once you start seeing self-harm, whether cutting, whether poking, whatever it is that a person might be doing to harm his or herself, somebody might, let me just clarify this, there might be people who like pain, which is a different thing. Some people have no issues poking themselves.
Right.
But if this accompanies thoughts about dying,
Yes.
then it is a problem, because what the pain is doing is actually making them comfortable.
Interesting.
It's making them comfortable with the idea of hurting themselves, because naturally we do not want to do this.
Of course not.
Naturally we don't want to hurt ourselves.
Yeah.
Naturally, as a matter of fact, we have a life instinct in us. We want to live.
We want to live.
So it takes a level of, and let me use this, and I hope the viewers would understand this in context. Courage.
Let's talk specific to that, because that may mean different things for different people, but specific to this situation, because I know sometimes in life situations may be presented. I mean, you have people that will go to the fight or flight instinct, and then it will have people that feel bombarded by the situation, bombarded by the occurrence, and all of these things.
So when I say courage, I really mean boldness. It takes a level of boldness to harm yourself unto death, because that is not something that the average person wants to do.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact,
You'd want to survive. You'd want to live.
If in many cases, particularly when, and I don't want to mention this, let me not mention a method. I won't do that.
Yeah.
But there are some methods which, after a person has completed, investigators find signs of an attempt to stop.
Oh.
Because when it's all said and done, in the moment, they recognize, I don't want to
They
do
don't
this.
really want to do this.
I actually want to be here.
Yeah. So, I mean, so that begs the question that if someone intervenes at a particular time,
Right.
can, that be deterred?
In many instances, a phone call has caused people to step back? A phone call.
And that would be my definition of a guardian angel.
A distraction.
I feel like that. A distraction.
Yeah. Distractions cause people to change their minds all the time. Because the instinct to stay alive, that life instinct is real.
Yeah. I'm really strong. With just cause. Someone asked if someone has a specific plan for suicide, but do not indicate or have the availability of means to commit the act, would you rate it as a high risk or a medium risk?
Right. So of course, if a person has a plan and they have the means, red alert. Red alert.
Yeah,
Because they have what is required to carry out that plan.
exactly.
If the person has a plan but they don't have the means, I will not minimize this either, I would say it's just as critical to pay attention to this person by and perhaps important to ensure that they do not end up acquiring the means.
Right. Definitely. Definitely. Because so that intervention right there would be very crucial.
Yes.
Yeah. To ensure that the means, because that cocktail together,
Yeah, it's problematic.
very problematic. So in terms of the signs, of someone that is, I mean, because you literally won't know if someone is contemplating, if someone is planning, unless you see some sort of action, because you won't be able to tell just
Right.
by looking at someone.
And that's the thing about what is manifested. What is manifested is typically a representation of what is beneath the surface.
Right.
We know each other not because we know what we're thinking. We don't read each other's minds.
No.
We know each other because we've studied our patterns of behavior.
Yes, and mannerisms.
And mannerisms,
Yeah.
which comes from where?
The thought
Similarly,
always starts there.
you're not going to know what that person is thinking, but there are things that generally hint that there's some suicidal ideation.
So what would you say is, is one or a few of those general hints?
Okay, so there's a critical one. Well, actually, let's start with what we spoke of a while ago. Self-harm,
Yes.
immediate hint.
Immediate hint.
Once this person is harming themselves, you need to pay attention to that. Silence. Silence, particularly when a person would have been outspoken.
Right.
Just change in their interaction.
So if someone is like a typical extrovert, always have an opinion, something to say, always visible in a room because, and
they
then
disappear.
they disappear.
But also, even if the person is an introvert,
yeah.
there will still be a measure. Because you would still be aware that this person used to still interact at this level, but they've gone down a bit. Then you have situations where people visibly are not planning for the future. Like they don't care about what happens tomorrow. Sometimes with that, some people also send these cryptic messages where they say goodbye in a strange way. They're not saying like see you later, but they repeat goodbye almost as if
There's some sort of finality to it.
yes, like they mean they're not going to be coming back. Some people start giving things away, for example. They start getting rid of possessions. They start giving things away as an indication sometimes that I don't need these anymore because I'm not going to be here. And the list can actually go on and on, but there are a number of things that point directly to the presence of suicidal ideation in a person.
Yes.
No. The next reality is this. Sometimes, and that's a difficult pill to swallow.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not that obvious.
Exactly. So in that situation, and then sometimes, after it's completed, God forbid, the family or the loved ones, members, friends, parents, you're left thinking, how did I miss this?
So, again, prevention or ways that we can prevent this. Number one, don't take each other for granted. Do not assume that he's okay.
Yeah.
Do not assume that she's okay. So, for example, your child has not mentioned how their day went to you. As a matter of fact, it might not be a normal practice for you to talk about how your day is going.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that is it means that the child is probably plotting suicide. What I mean is that says that you need to be interacting with your child more than you are.
Definitely. Because
You need to understand what's going on in their world.
yes, otherwise you won't be able to identify when there is something different.
And how does this happen? I like to say this because there is something interesting that sometimes happens between childhood and adolescence, where parents were basically right there with their child during childhood, and then adolescence comes and they just let them go.
Yeah.
You have to transit, that relationship has to graduate, not disappear.
And you see, that may be the tricky part, because sometimes when, the facilitator of the graduation process, let's take, for example, children go through puberty, and then you're like, oh my goodness, let me just leave this child alone, because every instance, I mean, and I'm not speaking for all parents, like some parents will definitely persist, but depends, as you said, because people are different, they react different and all of that. And sometimes you would think, well, maybe if I, give you some space or whatever, and then...
Well, truth be told, people are not raising children, they're raising adults. And raising adults mean that you give you gradually increase the space.
Yeah.
Right. But in gradually increasing the space, you still have to be there.
And attentive. And know what's going on. Conversations.
And whether it be a child, not just parent-child, but siblings. Even adult siblings. Stay in contact with each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Find out where is he at? Where is she at? What's going on?
Yeah.
Because the type of suicide that takes place and shocks everybody because nobody saw it, it really happened. It was planned in secrecy. And nobody intervened personally. And I don't mean intervention via, hey, what's up? What's going on? You're not looking too good. Just intervention via conversation.
Exactly.
Just conversation.
Because I feel like if you have a conversation with someone who's at least planning, there will be some indicators, there will be some red flags, especially if it's someone that somebody that you're familiar with.
Another thing as well, in the midst of these conversations, it is important for us to convey positive regard, to actually express appreciation.
Yes.
I like having you here. This is why. So that this person does not falsely believe that nobody cares. Because nobody cares is a huge thing to say. Somebody cares.
But I feel like sometimes people would say something like nobody cares, because oftentimes we take appreciation for granted, or the need to appreciate somebody for granted, and not to be cliche at all, but literally sometimes people would take it for granted. Oh, that's my sister, she knows that I love her, or that's my brother, he knows that I love him, I'm just being tough. Or you're busy going about your own life and not necessarily making time to have that conversation. And when you have a conversation, appreciate.
Yes. I'm seeing more of now, and I totally love it. People who are actually having these appreciation parties for family members while they're alive, rather than waiting until they die to speak nicely of them.
Yeah,
and that is actually becoming more popular now, which is a good thing.
And I hope it's a trend that continues for a very long time.
Because we need to express our appreciation for each other.
Yeah, Definitely. I think that's so key. Someone asked, who are more likely to commit suicide, or I guess complete suicide, males or females?
Well, males tend to have a higher success rate.
A higher success rate. Why?
Males, the methods or the means that males mostly use tend to be a lot more potent.
And it's tricky because I don't want you to
I'm not gonna say. I'm not
exactly.
gonna
I
say.
don't want you to, because of course, there are different people looking, audience in different phases, different streams of life. But does that beg the question that we need to be even more attentive to the males in our families, especially because in the Caribbean, we have a tendency to kind of neglect speaking to males about softer sides, feelings, emotions. How are you doing? Typically, generally.
Guess what? There are males who actually have those conversations. It actually boils down to their upbringing, and perhaps how their parents raised them to be expressive.
Yeah.
Because generally, let's be honest, we tend to think, oh, you're crying, you're weak. When crying actually proves more strength than holding it in.
Yeah. There's strength in vulnerability. I saw that quote.
Correct. The other thing is that even from a physical standpoint, and I note, and perhaps it's something that children learn, a child will be hitting their father, right? Without the slightest inkling that, am I hurting him? He's a man, probably. Nah, he's not feeling that. He's a man.
Yeah.
Right? He's a man, so he could take that. You know what? That actually reflects how we view men generally in society.
Yeah, if you're strong, then deal with it. Deal with everything of life. And we neglect the fact that when it all boils down to it, men as well as women are all human beings. We all have feelings.
And so because, of course, the whole issue of being expressive, women generally talk more anyway. So they vent more. For a man who is going to decide, I've had enough, I'm going to do this. A lot of them have kept things inside, and they've gotten to a point where it's no turning back now. I don't even want it to happen slowly. I just want to disappear.
Yeah, and that's again because you're stifling those feelings. You're not expressing, or you don't feel like if it's your position or it's manly to do so. When it all comes down to what really does manly mean, exactly. in that it's manly to speak about things.
That manliness we're talking about seems to be viewed in the context of strength.
Yes.
But I think the issue is that strength is it's actually incorrectly defined.
Let's redefine strength, Josh.
Well, you know what? If I were to just start crying here right now, in front of you, in front of all the people viewing, some people might see that as weakness. Right? Why is that strength? Because I am not afraid to express how I feel.
You have the courage.
I have the courage to own
Yeah.
my emotion. You know what takes more courage as well? Walking away from a volatile situation. Hitting somebody readily is actually a sign of weakness. But we have
We're flipping it here. We're flipping it.
We need to flip it.
We need to
because
flip it.
it has been flipped incorrectly.
Yeah. We need to turn it back side up.
Exactly.
Instead of upside down.
Exactly.
We need to flip it because that's how it should be to begin with.
Yes.
So someone, and you see it starts from, how you raise your children. It starts from how you raise your boys.
Your boys.
and just being conscious of the fact that boys need love and affection, need to be able to express themselves. If you're hurting, say that you're hurting. If something, is wrong, or if you cry, that is okay. We need to tell boys that it's okay to cry.
A child hit me one time and I was like, wow, why would you do that?
Yeah,
Because
like it hurt.
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
I said
but
that internally.
as a person,
Right?
yeah. You
But
think
I'm
it
like,
hurt.
let me think about this here. Why do we think that it's okay to hit men? Men
We
have
don't hit
feelings.
girls, yeah.
We don't hit girls, so
Yeah,
why are
we
we hitting?
don't.
We shouldn't hit anybody.
Exactly. If a behavior is wrong, it should be wrong for both.
Correct. Now, I want to also touch another point as it relates to who is most at risk. There's a sense in which, minus making this gender specific,
Yes.
there's another sense in which anyone who has a plan and the means, whether male or female, they are most at risk.
Okay. Yeah. So it literally has, and coming back to the question, because who's most likely to commit or complete it, it's not specific to the type of person, even though males, as you say, may be additionally, vulnerable just because of the suppression of
Yeah.
the feelings and the emotions
Correct.
and everything like that. So that's very important to identify. But Josh, before we round up this conversation, and then specifically to suicide, and move on to a couple mythbusters before we end, let's talk a little bit about suicide and the media, because this, I believe, is very important, and it speaks to even hinting to your reluctance to say
Yes.
and
yes,
the
yes,
name
yes,
and
yes, yes.
identify methods, etc. Because sometimes, everything seems to be sensationalized.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this specific to news or specific to, media outlets, but
No.
with the prevalence of social media, with just how it's ubiquitous, throughout our lives. We get up in the morning, we reach for, our phones, we check Facebook, we check Instagram. If something happens, an accident happens, you would quicker see someone pick up the phone, reach for the phone to take a picture or go live, as opposed to, is that person okay? Is that person? So coming specifically back to, suicide and the media, this is particularly problematic.
Yes. So for the persons who might be wondering why or how come I did not actually mention specific methods,
Yeah.
it is because this has a way of actually giving ideas to someone who is sitting at home watching and might be having suicidal ideation, who might be struggling with suicidal thoughts. Oh, I didn't think of that. I didn't know I could do it that way, for example.
Wow.
It's actually important to not publish the method. Beyond publishing the method, it's also important not to make suicide a headline, like to make it this high profile thing that it's deserving of all the attention in the world.
Because that may be what
Because that can actually trigger someone.
triggers someone.
Because people are, when we talk about suicidal ideation and we talk about the range, right? Someone might be on the borderline. And that news clip that they saw gave them enough to work with.
Enough to work with. Yeah.
As far as, and you mentioned social media, right? So even having pictures, for example,
I was about to say.
that is rather problematic. For one, and this goes out to the public in general, because there was a time when people could have grieved their loved ones without being bombarded with images of them all over the place.
Yes.
And I think we need to really consider ourselves and we need to take a step back to that place where well, we didn't have a choice. We didn't have the means to do this.
Yeah.
But it is not the right thing to do.
Just being compassionate.
Just being compassionate
I
enough.
would believe, because, you know, it's a horrific thing to find out something about your family in the media. You know, you look on Facebook and you see a picture of someone, you know, or you look, I could just imagine how traumatic that would be for a person. And you yourself, you know, with your phone taking the picture, you may not be contemplating that. You may not be thinking that, oh my God, look at this. Let me take it and share it. You know, let me show this. And you're not thinking of the family, the friends, the respect, the regard, the grieving process, as you said, because this is literally a human being.
It is. We need to actually confront ourselves on this issue.
Mm-hmm.
My personal approach is that I tell people I don't want to see.
Yeah.
Why can't this be a trend? Why can't we now decide collectively
That
this
we
is
do
something
not.
that we will not do?
Yeah.
Honestly, we need to.
It definitely needs to happen, because if now we don't want to see, there is no reason
There's no reason.
to take the picture. There's no reason to publicize it. And sometimes, you know, we really get caught up in what we see happening, what we see, you know, being publicized, how a tool like social media is used, because again, it is a tool. It is a tool. It's a medium for communication.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, we, the people, are the ones in control of what we communicate or what we share. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is particularly important. So in terms of the media, we're speaking now about legitimate media houses specifically, because we spoke to people being more compassionate,
Yeah.
being more aware, but speaking now to traditional media, actual media outlets, how would you recommend? Because it's something that people will want to,
Yes.
I will assume that media would want to cover.
So here's the
how
thing.
do you cover it?
Yes, this is the fundamental issue. First of all, we understand that in life, they have good news and bad news. Mm-hmm. But in this particular case, it's important to cover the bad news in such a way that it does not contribute to more bad news.
Yes.
So, for example, just being mindful of issues such like avoiding showing the location, for
Yes.
example, because a location in and of itself could give somebody an
An idea.
The location, actually detailing the method, what was used and how, and also, well, not even also, what I would say is, rather than doing this, yes, you have to cover the story,
Yeah.
but why not make the part where you talk about how to deal with issues, why not attach that and make that the larger part of the story?
Yes.
So that people don't leave with this, or that person killed themselves.
Yes.
But they leave with what to do if I feel this way, what to do if I'm experiencing these thoughts. Mm-hmm. Let that be the headline.
Yeah, because that is what is needed. That is the reason for the outcome that you're covering. You know, so definitely that sort of intervention is necessary.
Or telling people where they can go, or just
Giving
identifying
help. Yes.
things they can do.
Yes, that can be done. So the narrative definitely needs to be addressed and needs to be changed.
It does.
We need to turn it right side up with regards to suicide, how we treat with it, how we cover it, and just individually, you know, your personal ethic, you know, on a person to person level. And of course it may vary, because, you know, you have different people, but it's just putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Mm-hmm. Literally, at the end of the day, what if this was your family member?
What would you have done?
What would you have done? It's as simple as that. Someone asked a question, is suicide related to impulsiveness?
So it can be, because there, in some instances where persons lack impulse control, mm-hmm. it can actually be an impulsive action.
Okay.
It's possible, yes, without a doubt, because for a number of persons, the impulse control is the thing that stops them from going the extra mile.
Yeah. From actually
So
completing.
if you couple suicidal ideation, which includes the means, with impulsivity,
Yeah. That's
you have a problem.
that's the biggest red flag.
Yes.
Biggest red flag. Let's talk a little bit about some of the myths that are associated with suicide specifically. Because again, the reason for this conversation is to literally just debunk a lot of, the mental blocks that we may have with regards to these specific instances.
So one myth is that if a person decides to commit suicide, there's nothing that can be done. It's a death sentence. If a person is having suicidal thought, then they're on their way and they can't be stopped. They can, and that would have come out in our conversation earlier.
Yes.
Right. The fact is, people want to live.
Yeah, and it could just be an intervention that is needed, like an article saying, "This is what you can do."
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
Right. Ding ding. What's another myth?
Most people, particularly most young people who have suicidal ideation, don't seek help. Here's the thing about communication. Communication happens verbally, like we're communicating now, but it happens non-verbally. And there are a lot of instances where, whether young people or mature people tend to communicate that they're having this trouble
Yes.
non-verbally.
It's a matter of awareness.
It's a matter of awareness, and it's also a matter of ensuring that you do not minimize what you see. Because some people literally close their eyes and go, it's going to go away. That happens.
Yeah, that's literally a coping mechanism for them.
Because here's the issue. Remember, this is a mental health issue. And it is one that is actually, how should I say this? It's one of the heaviest issues because of the impact, because of how devastating it is. Yet still there's a stigma associated.
Yes.
And so it is easier for some people, it is easier to actually deny the fact than to admit or accept that indeed my family member is struggling with suicidal ideation. And this goes back to the importance of removing the stigma and the taboo.
Yes. Yes.
So
because the reason why people will want to ignore is because they feel some sort of way, or they feel they would be judged, or their family member would be judged, or it's some sort of inefficiency within them, especially if it's like a parent dealing with a younger, a child, or family, sister, brother relationship. It always, sometimes you think, okay, well, this may reflect badly on me.
Yeah.
And not necessarily what the person requires to intervene and change.
And so people don't get the help they need. Because of that.
Any other myths?
If a person survives suicide, chances are they'll most likely attempt, or rather, if a person survives suicide, an attempt,
Yeah.
it automatically means that they will die by suicide. No. Is a person who has attempted at risk? Yes.
Yeah.
But it does not mean we should not write them off as if there is no chance for them to recover. Right? Because if whatever we think is chronic, for example, it means that in our minds we have already decided that there is no turning back.
Yes.
So yes, it is true that if a person attempts, they are at risk, but it does not mean that they will die by suicide.
Exactly. So there's always hope.
We can
There's
write them off.
Exactly. There's always
can
hope.
write
There's
them
always
off.
hope. And the fact that they are alive means that it's an opportunity for a turnaround. Specifically, before we go back to any other myths, someone said it's important to advise media hosts not to run to the family members who have just had a family member commit suicide and bombard the family members with a million questions, and also expect family members to speak on camera.
Oh, without a doubt. You know what? Actually, even in the case of a person dying in an accident, for example, or some other violent issue, I see people's reluctance to speak to the media. I see it.
course.
And do I understand it? 100%.
100%.
110%.
More.
So empathy is the
Yes.
buzzword here. What's
Yes.
empathy? Empathy is being able to put yourself in a person's position and feel as if you were actually there. How do I feel because of this? That means I need to adjust how I deal with this person. I need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, definitely. Because, just thinking to myself, like I cannot stand seeing a graphic situation. Sometimes even reading about it, makes me feel very disturbed. Whether it's fictional, whether it's, reality, it's very difficult to deal with. So and this is me not having any sort of association or affiliation with the incident or the people. So just to imagine how someone will feel in that moment, especially if it's your family member, and, you rush
at them.
to get the story, to put it out there, I understand the need, because as a media practitioner myself, I understand the need. But at the end of the day, there is a greater calling as a person, as a human, and my personal ethic with regard to that is very strong. And so I would understand someone saying that, and they said, thank you very much, because this situation is something that people here in Grenada have been dealing with.
Can I go further with this to say that even in relation to, as we're talking about empathy,
Yes.
even in relation to mental health and mental issues, we also need to practice empathy, because empathy is going to remove the stigma.
Yes.
Empathy is going to always say, what if it were me? What if it were my family member? How would we want to be treated?
Yeah. Because when you yourself, you're going through a situation, you don't perceive it as abnormal. You don't perceive yourself as, mental. You don't bracket yourself or think about yourself like, oh my God, or even maybe if you do, you still have some sort of understanding, because you know that you're going through a situation, for certain people who are aware. So why then is it so difficult for us to extend that, to other people, or just the awareness that's
what would help is when we really contemplate and come to terms with the fact that we do not have immunity.
Yes. And I think that's one of the biggest myths.
We don't have immunity.
There's no one immune.
No one is immune. People don't recognize that we just might be one circumstance away from a breakdown. One circumstance away from an episode or from the onset of some type of mental issue.
In the continuum of mental health.
And on the continuum, if
continuum.
we're going to be honest, many people are not 100% either. So we just need to be mindful of that.
Yes, definitely. And before we wrap up, there are other general myths in just surrounding mental health and mental awareness that I think is very important, because this is the second part of this conversation, and I think that for this one particularly, we delved very deep into specific into specific issues and, just helping people identify. And I think people have been really, with the questions that have been coming in, I know there's a level of contemplation happening. So I would definitely say that this would be the perfect time to address like those general. So some of the myths that I have identified is that, all people with mental illnesses have bizarre, disruptive, unpredictable behavior. And from this conversation and the one before, that is definitely not the case.
So here's the issue. People don't recognize this. A diagnosis is a classification.
Okay.
And with diagnosis, you are able to understand and you can also predict. The people who have not been diagnosed, the quote-unquote healthy people who do not struggle with specific challenges related to a particular mental disorder, are actually far more unpredictable than the person who has the mental disorder.
Yeah.
Because the person who has the mental disorder, based on the diagnosis, we are aware these are the symptoms. This is what might be displayed.
Yeah, so you have an idea of what to look for.
What about you and I?
Yeah.
We're unpredictable.
And that is an interesting point. An interesting point, because again, it brings us back to that we are not absolved, we are not above it. We are not immune. It's not a situation, we're not vaccinated against it,
Wow.
We are not vaccinated
against
mental. And I have to say it that way because you can intervene for some physical, illnesses, but how do you intervene?
If I were to say this, the most we can do by way of vaccination
it's a watchword in these times.
Yes, is to ensure we practice healthy habits.
Yes.
Which is, like even with the coronavirus, we talk about the social vaccination, which would be healthy habits.
Yes.
If we practice healthy habits personally, this would act as a preventive measure.
Yes.
Which does not mean that we are entirely immune nonetheless.
Definitely. Another myth, all people with mental illnesses should be medicated.
Definitely not.
Definitely not. Once you have a mental illness, you will always have it.
Some mental illnesses are chronic, just like some physical complaints are. But it does not mean, let me put it this way. There are persons who live with diabetes.
Yes, exactly. That's a chronic
And it's
physical
under
illness.
control.
Exactly.
Similarly, there are mental illnesses that can be controlled, medicated and controlled, and persons can live normal lives. Well, let me not say normal. Normal is a strange word, but
Yes.
they can function effectively.
And so, in the same way that you won't shun someone for taking medication for their diabetes and their hypertension or anything like that, you should not. We do not shun someone for having to be medicated or treated for a mental illness or a mental disorder.
Because associated with that myth is the concept or the idea that medication for mental illness will make you crazy. So once you take that, you're going to lose your mind.
Yes, that is.
And so many people actually, they hide from their own treatment because of the stigma.
Because of the stigma.
Because of the stigma, they hide from their own treatment.
And impede their
progress.
Own progress and wellness. Another one, people with mental illnesses and their families are to blame for their condition.
Absolutely not.
Exactly.
So let me say this before I say absolutely not. In some instances, you might have a situation where, because of family experiences, right? People, there are symptoms that can develop as a result of problematic family experiences. And should we absolve the family of all responsibility. Well, they have to take responsibility for their actions. But to say that it is always, that we can always blame the family, that is actually troublesome, because that is not the case. And I think because families themselves would actually have that mindset, that may be the reason why sometimes the family would even hide a family member.
Yeah.
Because they don't want the public to say,
To know.
this is our fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what? If they don't receive, you know what you should worry about? Here's the fault you should worry about. Stopping your family member from receiving the help that they need.
Yes.
That should carry more weight
That is the
to you
overarching
than
issue.
people finding out that your family member is mentally ill.
Because it begs the question, are you more concerned about the well-being of that person, or are you more concerned about a perception
The
that
image
people
of
may
your
have,
family.
the image of your family?
Yeah.
And the health and well-being of people always more important than a thought that someone may have about you, especially when it comes to specifically helping that person to have a semblance of a regular life.
Yes. Because recovery is the idea. And we do not recover by hiding from
What is happening?
what's happening. We recover by dealing with what's happening.
Yeah. So when you have a pain, you go to the doctor
Easily.
easily, and you're not worried that, oh, somebody gonna say I have diabetes. It's like, so what? You know, it's the same thing here. It's the same thing here, and that's what we want to get to the crux to. And then the last one is that people with mental illnesses should be isolated from the community.
So here's the thing. If a person, based on the mental illness that is present, if they have become a danger to themselves and others,
Yes.
it is necessary to institutionalize that person. Because, yes, things can go wrong.
Yeah.
Things can go spectacularly wrong.
Yeah.
But the reality is, because mental health is such an anonymous issue, there are so many people who live among us that have mental issues.
Yes.
And not everybody who has a mental issue needs to be isolated.
And you can still be functional.
You can still function.
Exactly. And I think that that's an excellent note for us to, bring the curtain down. We've been having this conversation, for
Feel like
a
we've
while.
been talking for hours.
Yes, I think it's been like almost 2 hours, but it's definitely something, and people weighing in with the questions specifically, help to spur this conversation. And I feel like this is definitely something that would have been resourceful and assisted people, or at least made people a little bit more mindful and aware. So Josh, this is our second conversation on your mental wellness. How would you just round it off for everyone? What would be the number one takeaway that you'd want to leave all of the viewers with?
Can I tell you that after every one of these conversations, my takeaway would be the same, or the final thing that I say would be the same?
Yes.
End the stigma. End the stigma. Begin to recognize that mental health is part of your overall health.
Yes.
And so that means that nothing is wrong if you look after your mental health the same way you would look after your physical health. Something is entirely wrong if you judge somebody because you're aware that they have a mental issue.
Yeah.
Let's end the stigma, and let's practice empathy in dealing with the issue of mental health from now and beyond.
Yes, perfect. That's perfect, and it literally summarizes my takeaway. And Josh, I want to thank you so much. I want to, just encourage you to continue with your studies. We need more people like you, as I said in a conversation, with you on the side. Just knowing, that you are a clinical psychologist, a psychotherapist. Just thinking about it already debunks, certain stigma, that is associated with having conversations, seeking counseling, seeking psychotherapy. And I know that you're doing your PhD, and with the wealth of knowledge that you have, and you still have a lot of years in front of you, you know, you could do a lot more. And I know that just from the feedback, everyone has been, you know, just saying how much this conversation and conversations like this really assist. And I know that you do so much. So I really want to, you know, encourage people to, if you need to contact, you know, Josh at Optimal Solutions specifically to have further conversations, because a lot of things are sensitive to discuss, you know, live on air on a platform like this. So we're having the conversation to open it up. But you know, of course, you're welcomed. You know, if you identify anything you want to go further with any conversations that we've touched on over this 2-part series, feel free to contact Josh and his team at Optimal Solutions. You can email them at info.optimalsolutionsgnd@gmail.com, or you can contact them 443-2894. That's the landline, or feel free to WhatsApp or access the mobile number 421-6159. So many opportunities there for you to contact, whether it's an email, you feel, okay, it's an impersonal WhatsApp message, so it's easy to start the conversation. That's what we need. And so, Josh, thank you again so much. Truly appreciate it. Having this conversation with you, even though I had a certain level of awareness coming into this, I feel like it added so much. And I think that this was definitely needed. I'm so happy to be able to have this conversation, and I'm so happy to have it with you.
Indeed, my pleasure.
Literally, it's been so easy speaking to you. And so in speaking about the ability to have this conversation, I must recognize Arise Credit Union in facilitating, you know, this conversation and other conversations that we will continue to have in holistic wellness. It's very important to destigmatize certain issues, especially surrounding mental health, your mental wellness, and just awareness of people generally. You know, as Josh would have said, you know, it's a continuum. No one is above it. No one is immune. So these conversations are definitely ones that are very important for our society, and I believe it's very resourceful. I trust that you would have gained a lot from it. You would have realized the notion and why we decided to have this conversation. And again, understanding that mental wellness is very crucial and very important to even your financial wellness, to even in you achieving your goals, to even in you having a successful day tomorrow, as simple as that. So again, thank you, you know, to Arise Credit Union, just personally, also from me, because this is a real conversation, facilitating real conversations like this. And thank you so much to all of our viewers for tuning in, being a part of the conversation, giving us feedback. To the crew, the technical team at TNR Communication, it is always a pleasure working with you guys. Thank you so much as a whole technical team, making sure that we have the conversation, we stay on the live, we stay clear. You know, thank you so much to GBN Television for facilitating the broadcast of this conversation, again, because we were live on Arise's Facebook page, additionally on GBN Television. So the entire staff, the technical crew right now at GBN facilitating this, thank you so much. And again, for more information about our upcoming conversations, because as I said, this is a series. We had 2 parts of your mental wellness because there was so much to really unpack. We also have coming up your physical wellness, and we will have a conversation with Dr. Brooks Smith-Lowe and Mrs. Stephanie Simpson-Lewis. And then the final in the series will be on your financial wellness, because of course Ariza wants to ensure that everyone will be able to attain financial freedom. Your objective is financial freedom, and facilitating that conversation together with myself would be Miss Kimberlyn Regis and Mrs. Luann Phillips Henry. So again, it was an absolute pleasure. Stay connected to Ariza Credit Union on their social media platforms and digitally: Facebook at Ariza Credit Union, Instagram at Ariza CU, and the website arizacreditunion.com. Again, my name is Akira Patterson. It was an absolute pleasure having this conversation and assisting in any way possible in starting these difficult discussions sometime to have a difference and to make a difference. Until next time, have a blessed evening and be aware of each other. Thank you and good night.
Ariza says, thank you.
This live stream was powered by PartyGrenada.com.